It was just past midnight when the chilling call shattered the quiet of the widow's small ranch. The wind was howling softly through the open windows, carrying the scent of rain and the faint rustle of the prairie grass. Mary Jane sat by the flickering lamp, her hands trembling as she reached for the receiver. The line was dead for a moment. Then a hollow, distorted voice whispered, "They're gone. Everything's been taken." She sat upright, heart pounding, realizing in that instant that her life was about to change forever. The thieves had struck under the cover of darkness, stealing her cattle, her livelihood, and her hope. Her mind raced with fear and fury. How could anyone do this? Why her? The silence of the night was deafening now, broken only by her shallow breaths and the distant howl of a coyote. In that moment, Mary Jane knew she couldn't wait for help. She had to act fast. She grabbed her coat, her boots, and a battered old rifle from the corner of the porch. She looked out over the empty fields, her eyes searching the darkness for any sign of the culprits. But all she saw was the vast, indifferent prairie stretching endlessly into the night. As dawn approached, a sense of resolve settled over her. She would find those responsible. She would see justice done. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. The weight of her loss pressed down on her, a heavy reminder of how vulnerable she had been. The stolen ranch wasn't just land. It was her family's legacy, her dreams, her future. Suddenly, a faint trail of footprints appeared at the edge of her property, leading toward the hills. She studied them carefully, recognizing the pattern, large, muddy boots hurriedly made. Whoever had taken her cattle hadn't been careful. They'd left a trail. A plan was forming in her mind, fueled by desperation and a fierce determination to reclaim what was hers. Word spread quickly through the nearby towns. Rumors of the theft rippled like wildfire. But Mary Jane knew she couldn't wait for help from the authorities. They'd be slow, if they came at all. The law had its limits, especially in these parts, where justice was often a matter of strength and resolve. Then, unexpectedly, the word reached a local cowboy named Jesse Boone, known for his unwavering sense of justice and his fearless spirit. When he heard about the raid, his jaw clenched. A rancher's loss was a blow to all of them, and he knew what needed to be done. Without hesitation, Jesse gathered a fleet of fellow cowboys, 300 strong, each riding with purpose, their horses kicking up dust as they headed toward Mary Jane's ranch. By late afternoon, the horizon was darkened by the mass of cowboys, a sea of chaps, hats, and determined faces. They came not just to seek revenge but to restore order, to stand shoulder to shoulder against those who thought they could steal and get away with it. The air was thick with anticipation. The group split into smaller units, tracking the trail that Mary Jane's eyes had identified earlier. Every hoofbeat and every broken branch was a sign of the battle to come. The landscape, once peaceful, now felt charged with the impending clash. The cowboys' voices echoed as they shared stories, their spirits unbroken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the first signs of the bandits' hideout appeared. A ragged campfire flickered in the distance, and silhouettes moved cautiously around it. The cowboys tightened their grip on their reins, knowing that justice was just hours away. In that moment, the wind carried a message of hope and resolve. Mary Jane stood at the edge of her property, watching the horizon fill with the silhouettes of her allies. Her eyes shimmered with tears, part relief, part determination. She knew this wasn't just about reclaiming her land. It was about standing up against injustice, about proving that even in the darkest night, the spirit of the West refused to be broken. The stage was set. The cowboys were ready. And in the stillness of that twilight, a quiet promise was made that no thief, no matter how bold, could steal justice from a community that refused to give up. Because when 300 cowboys ride together, justice isn't just a hope. It's a promise they are determined to keep. Mary Jane stood alone on the porch of her small ranch as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. Her heart was heavy, not just with grief from the recent loss, but with a burning sense of duty that refused to fade. She clutched a faded photograph in her hand. Her husband, James, smiling proudly next to her, their children running around in the background. It was a simple picture, but in that moment it was everything. James had always believed in justice, in doing what was right no matter the cost. His words echoed in her mind. Never let this land, our legacy, be taken without a fight. That vow, made on their wedding day, had become her moral compass. It was a sacred promise she carried, one that bound her to him even beyond death. When the bandits struck and stole her cattle, her home, and her future, it felt like they had stolen a piece of her soul. But what hurt most was knowing James's words were now tested. She thought of her husband's unwavering conviction, how he had stood for the weak, fought for his neighbors, and believed in justice as the foundation of their community. She could still hear his voice. This land is more than dirt and cattle. It's our history, our family's honor. We protect it no matter the cost. That promise was more than words. It was a moral debt she owed to him, to her family, to everything they had built together. The theft wasn't just about material loss. It was an assault on their legacy, a challenge to everything James had believed in. As she looked out over the empty fields, tears blurred her vision but also ignited a fierce determination. She would not let their efforts be wiped away by outlaws. She would honor her husband's memory by standing tall, by fighting to restore what was theirs, no matter the odds. Her silent vow echoed through her mind. She would seek justice, not just for herself but for the ideals her husband had held dear. The bond they shared was unbreakable, sealed by love, sacrifice, and a shared belief in fairness. That bond was her strength now, fueling her resolve to see this fight through. It was more than obligation. It was a sacred duty, a moral debt she owed to the man who had given everything for this land. She whispered a prayer, her voice trembling but determined. James, I promise you, I won't let this stand. I will get our land back, and I will do it in your name. In that moment, she felt his presence, his spirit guiding her, reminding her of the promise they had made, the promise to protect their home, to uphold justice, and to honor their love. That promise was her guiding star, her reason to fight. As the sun rose higher, casting light on the broken fences and trampled soil, Mary Jane knew her battle was only beginning. But her heart was unshaken. Her moral debt was clear. She would carry his memory forward, strengthened by love, driven by duty, and she would see justice served, not just for her, but for the legacy they had built together. Because some bonds, forged in love and sacrifice, are eternal, and in her heart, she knew that her vow to James would never be broken. Jesse sat alone in the dim light of his old barn, the air thick with dust and the scent of dried hay. The place was a shell of what it once was, weathered wood, creaking with every gust of wind, and walls lined with relics of a life long gone. Outside, the vast desert stretched endlessly, a barren, unforgiving landscape that seemed to echo his own sense of emptiness. His hands rested on a weathered wooden work table, trembling slightly as he stared at a faded photograph resting there. A picture of him and his father, both young and strong, standing proudly beside a steer they'd raised together. That image haunted him now, a reminder of the man he'd failed to protect. Jesse's face was lined with scars, both physical and emotional. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from a long-ago fight. His eyes, once bright with hope, now held a shadow of regret. He reached out and traced the scar gently with a finger, as if trying to erase the pain etched into his skin. The silence in the barn was heavy, broken only by the distant howl of the wind whipping through cracks in the old wood. It was as if the environment itself mourned with him. On a nearby shelf, dust-covered medals and old letters lay in disarray. A tarnished medal from a long-forgotten rodeo. A letter from his mother, crisp, faded, with ink that had begun to bleed. He picked it up, his fingers trembling as he read her handwriting. Asterisk, Jesse, my boy, remember who you are. No matter where life takes you, hold on to your honor. The land is more than dirt. It's our history, our soul. Asterisk, her words, so simple yet profound, felt like a weight pressed upon his chest now. He closed his eyes and pressed the letter to his heart, wishing he could hear her voice one more time. The scars on his body and the relics around him were symbols of a past filled with struggle, loss, and hollow victories. Jesse had fought hard, but in the end, he knew he had failed his family and his community. His ranch, what was left of it, lay in ruins, stolen away by bandits who cared nothing for the blood and sweat he had poured into that land. Every wound he bore was a reminder of the mistakes he'd made, of opportunities missed, of promises broken. He felt the weight of guilt settle heavily on his shoulders, a burden he carried alone. The empty house nearby was worse. Its once lively rooms now stood silent, echoing with memories of laughter and family dinners. Jesse's gaze lingered on the cracked window pane, where sunlight streamed through and cast fractured shadows across the dusty floor. The house was a mirror of his soul, fractured, hollow, longing for what once was. He remembered his wife's voice, soft and warm, telling him to stay strong for their children, to hold on to hope. But hope had faded along with the land they loved. He clenched his fists, fighting back tears, feeling the ache of loss deep in his chest. The land was gone, and with it part of his identity. The guilt gnawed at him, guilt for not being able to protect his family's legacy, guilt for not being enough to keep the thieves at bay. Yet amid the despair, a flicker of resolve ignited. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he couldn't let this define him. He had to find a way to carry on, to honor his past and make amends. Jesse looked back at the photograph, his hand lingering over the faces of those he'd lost. His wife, his children, his father, the sacrifices they'd made, the love they'd shared, all pressed into his memory like an unbreakable chain. That chain was his anchor now, tethering him to the only thing that mattered. His sense of morality, his connection to those he loved, and the land that had sustained them. He stood slowly, the creak of the barn sounding like a funeral march. His gaze settled on the dusty metals and the faded letter. For a moment, he closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer, an apology for his failures and a vow to seek redemption, to fight not just for revenge, but for the memory of those he'd lost, for the honor that still burned within him. In that quiet, lonely space, Jesse found a sliver of peace. His past might be broken, his wounds deep, but his spirit, though battered, still held a spark of hope. And as he stepped outside into the desert's endless horizon, he carried that hope with him, knowing that someday, somehow he would find a way to heal, and maybe, just maybe, restore what was lost. Jesse reached for his battered old radio, the device crackling to life as he dialed a number he knew by heart. His voice was steady, but beneath it, there was a fire, an unyielding call for justice. "Tom, it's Jesse. We've got a situation. I need you and the boys to ride out with me. No questions. Just trust me on this." The line went silent for a moment before a gravelly voice responded, "You got it, Jesse. We're with you. Always." That was Tom, loyalty incarnate, the kind of man who'd stand by his friends through fire and flood, bound by bonds forged in years of sweat and shared struggles. Jesse then reached for his old, battered phone, punching in another number. It rang twice before a deep voice answered, "Maggie here. I heard what's happened. You can count on me. I've got your back." Maggie, courage embodied. Once a sheriff's deputy, now a rogue outsider who had faced her own demons, she'd risk everything for what was right. Her resolve hardened by a past filled with loss and redemption. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen darkness but chose to fight for the light. Next, Jesse's fingers moved swiftly to another contact. The line was picked up after a few rings. "Eli speaking. You want wisdom? You've got it. I'll meet you. Just say where." Eli was a quiet man, a veteran who'd seen the worst of war and come out the other side with scars and stories that spoke of resilience. His calm presence was a steadying force, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to hold back and when to strike. Finally, Jesse hesitated for a moment before dialing the last number. The voice on the other end was rough but familiar. "Billy, it's Jesse. We need to move fast. The bandits took everything, and now it's time to take it back. I need you to bring the gear, the fire, the heart. Will you stand with us?" Billy's gravelly chuckle echoed through the line. "You know I will, Jesse. I've been waiting for a fight like this. Let's give 'em hell." Billy, redemption in motion, a man who'd fought his own battles with addiction and regret, but found purpose in defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Each voice, each call, was a thread in a tapestry of human values: loyalty, courage, wisdom, redemption, woven together into a shield against injustice. As Jesse hung up, he looked out over the horizon, feeling the weight of their unity. These weren't just allies. They were the embodiment of everything worth fighting for, people who understood that standing together was the only way to overcome darkness. In that moment, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the land. The silhouettes of the riders began to appear, one by one, emerging from the dust and dawn like a force of nature. Jesse felt a surge of hope, a belief that, no matter how broken the land or the past, these bonds could forge a path toward justice. Their shared values fueled their resolve, making them more than just individuals. They were a family, united by purpose, standing against the theft of a widow's land and the invasion of their morals. They rode out, determined and unbreakable, each carrying the strength of their human virtues. Because in a world where injustice reigns, it's the loyalty that keeps the fire burning, the courage that pushes forward, the wisdom that guides the way, and the redemption that restores hope. Together, they would face whatever came, bound by a promise to stand for what's right, no matter the cost. And in that unity lay the true power to restore justice, one brave step at a time. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when the first riders set out, dust swirling behind them like spirits rising from the earth. The landscape stretched wide and endless, a tapestry of dirt, rocks, and scrubby grass that seemed to echo the vastness of their resolve. Jesse led the charge, his silhouette dark against the pale dawn, every muscle tense, every thought a knot of anticipation and memories. The journey was more than miles covered. It was a pilgrimage into the heart of their shared purpose, a crossing from despair into hope. The sky darkened as storm clouds gathered, rolling in like a tide of shadows threatening to drown the light. Thunder rumbled distant, a reminder that nature itself mirrored the turmoil within. Jesse's mind drifted to his father's words, "The storm will pass, but the land remains," a fragile hope buried deep in his memories. His hands clenched the reins tighter, fighting the wind that tried to toss him from his horse, fighting the doubt that clawed at his mind. Every mile brought them closer to the truth, but also deeper into the storm that threatened to break their spirit. As the riders pushed forward, the landscape shifted. The open plains gave way to jagged hills and tangled creeks, the scenery mirroring their internal struggle, a landscape both wild and unforgiving, much like the challenge they faced. The sun broke through the clouds briefly, casting golden light on the dust clouds rising behind them, a fleeting reminder of clarity amid chaos. Jesse's thoughts flickered to the widow and her lost land, her silent suffering echoing in his mind. He remembered her words, how she'd looked at him with hope and despair intertwined, promising that justice would be done. That promise was now etched into every mile they traveled, a moral compass guiding their way through darkness. Night fell quickly, the sky swirling with stars that seemed distant, cold, and indifferent. The world was silent except for the steady clop of hooves and the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. For a moment, Jesse slowed his horse, gazing up at the vastness above, feeling the weight of the journey, both literal and symbolic, pressing down on him. It was as if the universe itself was testing their resolve, shining a cold spotlight on the price of keeping a promise that stretched beyond the horizon. In the quiet darkness, memories surfaced, images of his family, the land they'd fought to protect, the nights spent dreaming of a future that now seemed fragile, slipping through his fingers. The storms had come and gone, but the scars remained, on his body and soul. He remembered the night his father took him aside, voice rough but steady, and said, "Son, never forget what's right. No matter how dark it gets, you gotta hold on to the light." That lesson fueled his every step now, a reminder that this journey was more than revenge. It was a test of character, a testament to the promise he'd made to his loved ones and himself. The miles blurred into a continuous rhythm, a heartbeat pounding through the landscape, echoing the pounding in Jesse's chest. Every mountain they crossed, every river they forded, symbolized the obstacles they faced, the doubts, the fears, the relentless assault of injustice. Yet, each step forward also represented hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice was worth every ounce of effort, every sacrifice. The wild terrain challenged their bodies, but it also challenged their spirits, forcing them to confront their own limits. As dawn broke once again, the horizon shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson, a symbol that even in the darkest moments, renewal was possible. Jesse looked ahead, eyes blazing with renewed determination, knowing that every mile brought them closer to reclaiming what was stolen. The landscape, with its vastness and unpredictability, had become a mirror of his own inner journey, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The journey was not just a quest for justice, but a pilgrimage through hardship, loss, and hope, a testament that promises made in love and duty are worth the price. With each stride, the land and Jesse's soul grew more intertwined, bound by the unbreakable vow to see it through, no matter the storm. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light on the rugged path ahead, he knew the true victory lay in the journey, in the steadfastness to stand for what is right, and in the courage to face whatever storms might come. The dust still clung to their boots as the group crested the final rise, revealing the outskirts of a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and open plains. The early morning light cast long shadows over the streets, which seemed almost too still, as if holding their breath before a storm. The silence among the 300 cowboys was heavy and deliberate, each man aware of the weight carried in their presence. They didn't speak. Their horses moved with purpose, steady and unwavering, like a living wall of resolve. The formation stretched wide across the road, a living tide of leather and steel, their figures casting looming shadows against weathered buildings. Every eye in the small town turned toward them, sensing the gravity in their quiet march, an unspoken promise of justice that would soon be realized. The moment was a transition, no longer just a journey through the wilderness, but a march onto the battleground of right and wrong. The group's collective presence was a powerful visual statement. They arrived not as individuals, but as a unified force. The sheer size of the group, the coordinated movement, created a ripple of awe and respect that silenced even the busiest townsfolk. They moved with purpose, shoulders squared, eyes fixed ahead, embodying the relentless spirit of the West. Their boots kicked up dust that mingled with the morning air, a tangible sign that something significant was happening. Every man carried the weight of his own story, but together they formed an unbreakable front, a living embodiment of justice taking shape. As they approached the town square, the silence deepened, almost reverent. The horses' hooves drummed softly on the dirt, echoing like a heartbeat that thrummed through the very ground beneath them. The group slowed their pace, forming a loose but disciplined formation, front line, flanks, and rear, each man aware of his place in the collective. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, not with hostility but with readiness, every muscle coiled like a spring awaiting release. The stillness was a stark contrast to the chaos they sought to confront, and it amplified the undeniable power of their presence. The town's courthouse loomed ahead, its weathered facade standing as a silent witness to justice and law. It was here that the balance of power would shift, the building that represented authority, judgment, and the hope of restoring what was lost. The Cowboys paused just outside, forming a wider circle, their ranks like a living shield around the small group of townspeople gathered in silent anticipation. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of anticipation and quiet resolve. No words were needed, the visual impact told the story. The sheer mass of them, the disciplined unity, sent a message. This was more than a band of men. It was a tidal wave of justice ready to break. Behind them, the town seemed to hold its breath, the buildings leaning in slightly as if drawn into the gravity of the moment. The Cowboys' presence had transformed the scene into a battlefield of morality, an unspoken challenge to the darkness that had threatened their land. Their formation was a wall of leather and steel, standing silent and unyielding, a testament that justice was coming, slow but unstoppable. The power of their silence was deafening, a collective declaration that they would not back down, that they had answered the call for righteousness. In that pause before confrontation, the visual tension grew thick, every pair of eyes fixed on the horizon, every breath held in anticipation of what was to come. The landscape around them seemed to blur into insignificance, overshadowed by the formidable silhouette of the group. They had arrived not just to seek justice but to embody it, to turn the tide against the darkness that had stolen the widow's land. The scene was a masterstroke of visual storytelling, an image of quiet strength, unity, and unwavering resolve. It was a moment that defined the transition from journey to battlefield, where the mere sight of these 300 cowboys was enough to ignite hope and ignite the spirit of confrontation. And as the first light of dawn touched their backs and the town, there was no doubt, their arrival had changed everything. The silence was an unspoken roar, a promise that justice would be served, no matter the cost. The courtroom was heavy with silence as the judge's gavel struck the wood, but beneath that silence, a storm of thoughts roiled in the minds of those present. The accused, a man cloaked in authority and respectability, someone who had long held sway over this town, sat with a calm exterior that betrayed nothing. But behind his eyes, a different story played out. A calculated game of manipulation, a moral corruption that twisted justice into a tool for personal gain. He was a master of words, of subtle intimidation cloaked in civility, and he knew exactly how to wield his influence to bend the truth. His voice, measured and smooth, spoke of mercy, of precedent, of necessity, all while weaving a narrative that painted the widow's plight as an inconvenience, a complication best left unresolved. He looked at the gathered crowd, at the jurors, at the witnesses, and at the defendant, each a pawn in his game. His mind was a chessboard, every move designed to maintain his control. He knew the facts of the stolen land, the broken promises, but he dismissed them with a gentle smile, as if dismissing a child's protest. Sometimes, justice needs to be tempered with mercy, he said, his tone hinting at moral superiority. But beneath that veneer, it was a calculated attempt to sway the room, to soften the outrage that threatened his authority. Standing for justice without crossing the line, the hero, Jesse Boone, watched quietly from the back, his eyes sharp, not with anger but with moral clarity. He understood the game he was up against. A man skilled at twisting morality into a weapon for personal preservation. Jesse's mind was a battlefield of values. Justice versus complacency, truth versus manipulation. Every word the judge uttered was a calculated move, a subtle attempt to erode the truth, to lull the room into apathy or confusion. Jesse knew that the real fight was not in physical confrontation but in the realm of intellect and ethics. He remembered the widow's quiet tears, her unwavering hope that truth and righteousness would prevail. That hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the subtle machinations of a man who thrived on moral gray areas. As the judge continued, Jesse's thoughts turned to the moral cost of silence. How complicity in injustice was a form of participation itself. The man before him was a master of moral ambiguity, a man who could sway a jury, a town with words alone. Jesse's resolve grew stronger. He wouldn't stoop to lies or intimidation. He would stand firm in truth, no matter how clever the opposition's words. Because sometimes the greatest battles are fought in the mind, against corruption, against manipulation, and Jesse knew that his silence, his unwavering stance for justice, was a form of resistance. The judge's voice dipped into the realm of moral gray, suggesting that perhaps the widow's loss was necessary, a sacrifice for the greater good of the town, a line Jesse refused to accept. His mind was a battleground of ethics, what was right, what was just, and what was acceptable. Every word he kept to himself was a silent stand, a refusal to be manipulated into accepting injustice. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense as the judge's words seemed to sway the room, but Jesse's conviction burned brighter. He understood that true justice wasn't about winning a verbal duel but about holding onto the moral high ground, about standing for what was right without crossing into moral compromise. The villain's power lay in his ability to distort reality, to make evil seem like necessity, to manipulate truth into a weapon. But Jesse's strength was in clarity, an unshakable belief that justice must be served, not through force, but through unwavering integrity. As the trial pressed on, Jesse's mind was a fortress of moral certainty. He knew the path was narrow and fraught with deception, but he also knew that the truth, no matter how carefully disguised, would ultimately surface. And when it did, it would be a victory not just of law but of conscience, an affirmation that justice, rooted in integrity, could withstand even the most skilled manipulator. The tension was not just in words spoken, but in the silent duel of ethics, a battle of minds and morals that defined the true fight for the widow's land and dignity. The courtroom was thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on the witness stand, where a small, trembling figure clutched a worn leather case. It was a moment that felt suspended in time, a final, decisive step toward truth. Jesse Boone stood in the shadows, watching as the woman, Mary Jane, took a deep breath and steadied herself. Behind her, a sheriff's deputy gently handed her an old tape recorder, a battered device that had been hidden away, buried in secrecy for months. Now, it was her voice, her truth, that was about to shatter the carefully constructed facade of the man who had stolen her land and her life's work. As she pressed the button, the room grew quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what was about to be revealed. The tape crackled briefly, then came her voice, raw and trembling but resolute. "This is Mary Jane. I've kept this recording hidden, out of fear, but I can't stay silent anymore. The man you see before you, Judge Carter, has been lying, manipulating, stealing from the very people he swore to serve. He's not the man of integrity he pretends to be. I recorded this during a visit to his office, after he tried to bribe me to drop my claim, offering me a sum of money and a promise that my land would be settled if I just kept quiet." Her voice cracked, but her resolve remained firm. "He's been pretending to be a pillar of justice, but behind closed doors, he's corrupt. He's been working with the same men who stole my ranch, trying to cover their tracks, trying to silence me. I have proof, documents, recordings, everything. I only hope this can finally bring the truth into the light." The room erupted into stunned silence. The judge's eyes widened as he recognized the recording, and the prosecutors scrambled to process the evidence. The room's energy shifted. What had seemed like a routine hearing suddenly cracked open, exposing the seedy underbelly of what had been concealed. The revelation was explosive, a moral detonator that shattered the illusion of authority. The buried truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, an insidious web of lies and corruption woven by those entrusted to uphold justice. And now it was out. The voice on the tape was no longer just a woman's desperate confession. It was the voice of truth breaking free from the shadows, vindicating her innocence and exposing the villain's mask. Jesse felt a surge of relief and vindication course through him. The moral weight lifted, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. The villain's carefully crafted image, one of respectability, morality, and authority, was crumbling before their eyes. The evidence had done what words could not. It had stripped away the veneer, revealing the rotten core beneath. The room's tension exploded into a wave of emotion: anger, outrage, and relief. The townspeople, who had quietly wondered about the whispers and rumors, now saw the truth laid bare. The villain's mask was shattered, and justice no longer felt like an elusive dream. It was real. It was happening. The moment became a turning point, not just for Mary Jane, but for everyone who had suffered in silence, waiting for someone to expose the darkness. Those 300 cowboys, standing silently in formation outside, now felt the full impact of this revelation. Their arrival had been more than a show of force. It was a moral declaration that truth and justice would prevail. The buried truth had been unearthed, and it had changed everything. As the room settled into a newfound clarity, Jesse's thoughts turned to the land, to the widow, to the moral cost of silence. This wasn't just about stolen property. It was about integrity, about holding on to what was right in a world that often blurred the lines between good and evil. The truth had surfaced, undeniable and unshakable, and with it, a moral release that reverberated through every corner of the room. The villain's mask was gone, and in its place was the stark reality of betrayal, exposed and condemned. Justice was no longer a distant hope but a tangible force, driven by a woman's courage and a community's awakening. The explosive power of that moment was felt deep in everyone's core, a reminder that even in the darkest shadows, truth has a way of rising to the surface, illuminating the path toward righteousness. And in that light, the fight for justice would continue, stronger and more certain than ever before. The sun was setting behind the hills as the crowd gathered in the small town square, a quiet but resolute energy filling the air. Jesse Boone stood among the gathered cowboys, his face calm but firm, knowing that what was about to unfold was more than just a confrontation. It was a moment of moral clarity. The villain, Judge Carter, had been brought before the community, his false veneer of respectability cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. The evidence was clear now. The recordings, the documents, the testimonies. Justice wasn't served through violence or revenge. It arrived through truth, integrity, and the courage to stand firm against corruption. As the town's sheriff stepped forward, he nodded to Jesse, signaling it was time. With a steady voice, Jesse addressed the crowd, his words measured, respectful. Today isn't about vengeance. It's about setting things right, about showing that justice is rooted in honesty and moral strength. We all know Judge Carter's reputation, how he's been looked up to, trusted, but that trust was built on lies. And today, those lies are exposed for all to see. He paused, letting his words sink in, then continued. This man, who was supposed to uphold the law and protect the innocent, has been working with the very men who stole from Mary Jane, the widow whose land was taken unjustly. He's been hiding behind a mask, pretending to be righteous, when in fact, he's been the source of the corruption. Jesse's voice grew steady but gentle. But truth has a way of coming out, and today, it's here for everyone to witness. The evidence has spoken publicly, undeniably. And with that, justice is being righted not through revenge, but through the truth that stands above all. A hush fell over the crowd as Jesse gestured toward the table where the evidence had been laid out. The recordings, the documents, the witnesses, each piece a thread pulling at the fabric of the false image Judge Carter had carefully woven. The judge's face paled, realizing his carefully constructed facade was crumbling before their eyes. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, disapproval, disappointment, and finally, a sense of moral victory. Judge Carter tried to speak, to deny, to defend himself, but his voice was weak, hollow. The truth had already been spoken. The community's eyes bore into him, not with hatred, but with disappointment and a quiet dignity. Because true justice isn't about tearing someone down. It's about revealing what's been hidden and restoring what's been broken. In that moment, Jesse saw Mary Jane, her face calm but touched with relief. Her courage, her unwavering belief in truth, had brought this day to life. She had kept her word, and her voice had shattered the darkness that had threatened her family's legacy. It was a moral victory, a testament to the power of integrity and the resilience of those who refused to be silenced. The crowd's applause was solemn but heartfelt, a collective acknowledgement that justice had been done, not through violence or revenge, but through honesty and moral strength. The villain's mask was gone, and his shame was plain for all to see. The community had chosen the path of righteousness, and in doing so had reaffirmed their faith in fairness and truth. Jesse stepped forward once more, looking at the crowd, then at Judge Carter. "Remember this day," he said softly. "Justice isn't about vengeance. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Today, we've shown that truth can't be hidden forever, that integrity will always find its way to the surface." His words carried a quiet power, a moral clarity that settled over everyone. As the crowd dispersed, the mood remained respectful, dignity intact. The villain had fallen, and the hero, Mary Jane, the community, and the truth had kept their word. Justice had arrived not through revenge, but through the unwavering pursuit of what's right. And in that moment, everyone understood that true strength lies in honesty, in holding on to one's integrity even when faced with darkness. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town as Jesse rode away, knowing that this day would be remembered, not as a tale of revenge, but as a testament to the enduring power of truth and dignity. Justice had arrived, and it had done so with compassion, respect, and the moral clarity that defines a truly righteous path. As the last light of the sun faded beyond the horizon, the town settled into a quiet reverence. The crowd had dispersed, the weight of the day's revelations lingering in the cool evening air. Jesse Boone, his face touched with a quiet sense of relief and resolve, mounted his horse and turned away from the gathered crowd. His job was done, not with the flash of violence or the roar of confrontation, but through unwavering integrity, truth, and the moral strength of a community that refused to turn away from justice. As his horse's hooves softly pressed into the dirt, he rode along the open road, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky above. The journey was not about leaving behind a battle, but about carrying forward a promise, one of renewal and hope. Behind him, the town's silhouette flickered with the flickering glow of lanterns, a subtle reminder that even after darkness, there is light, faint but persistent. The land stretched endlessly ahead, an open canvas of possibility. The road was long, winding through hills and valleys, but Jesse's spirit felt lighter. He knew that change had begun, not through revenge, but through a collective act of moral courage. The villain had fallen, his mask shattered by truth, and now, a new chapter was quietly unfolding. Meanwhile, at the widow's ranch, Mary Jane stood at the edge of her land, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a sight she had not seen in a long time, an image of beauty and promise, a symbol of renewal. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar earth beneath her feet, the wind whispering promises of new beginnings. The stolen years, the pain, the loss, all of it was part of her story now, but it was no longer the end. It was a foundation on which she would build anew. She looked up at the endless horizon, her heart quietly swelling with hope. Her brother, standing beside her, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, sharing her silent optimism. Their bond, strengthened through hardship, was unbreakable. In that moment, the land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The scars of theft and betrayal would fade with time, replaced by new growth, grass, flowers, future generations. It was as if the very earth was whispering that renewal is always possible, even after the darkest storms. The stars began to emerge, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast, infinite sky. They twinkled like distant promises, silent witnesses to the enduring hope that persists beyond pain. The open road stretched out before Jesse, a symbol of journeys yet to be taken, of paths waiting to be explored. The sunset's glow lingered on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the world. It was as if the universe itself was offering a quiet benediction, an acknowledgement that justice, rooted in integrity, had been served, and that life, in its endless cycle, would continue to renew itself. The stars above shimmered brighter, a celestial mirror of hope, guiding those who dared to believe in a brighter tomorrow. As Jesse's figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the scene faded into a tranquil silence. The land, the people, the stars, all seemed to hold their breath, carrying the weight of the day's events with grace and dignity. A gentle breeze swept across the plains, rustling the grass and whispering stories of resilience. The open road remained, an eternal symbol of freedom and new beginnings, an invitation to all who looked upon it to keep moving forward, to trust in the promise of renewal, and to believe that even after pain, hope can rise again. And so, in the quiet beauty of that moment, life continued, steadfast, patient, and full of promise. The darkness of injustice had been met with the light of truth, and the universe seemed to echo that truth in the shimmering stars above, silent yet profound. The road ahead was open, the future unwritten, but in the hearts of those who endured, hope and faith burned bright. For in the end, it was not just a story of loss and justice. It was a story of rebirth, of a new dawn rising from the shadows of the past, and of a land that, like its people, refused to be broken.